In the Situation Room at the White House, U.S. President Carmen Carliotti sat almost alone. For security reasons, the Vice President and other members of the Executive Committee of the National Security Council dialed into the meeting via video link from various facilities across the country. They were still at DEFCON 1, cocked pistol, working on the assumption that those signs were still that China didn't want a nuclear war. The more pressure they put their rival under, not to mention its less predictable allies, the higher the risk of a misstep became. The only other person in the room with her was her new chief of staff. H.R. Rosenstern had requested leave to resign almost immediately after the NSC members had all been vaccinated and were able to return from Greenland. Just before he'd resigned, he'd chaired an emotionally challenging meeting of the National Security Council Executive Committee, XCOM, which was deciding who would live and who would die, both in her own administration and in China's. The case of vaccine recovered from Taiwan had contained enough doses for the entire Taiwanese executive yuan, or cabinet, and their families. It was more than enough to allow competing vaccine scientists in the U.S. to reverse engineer an H5N1C vaccine and to vaccinate senior members of the Carliotti administration. They had 1,000 doses, which sounded like a lot back then, but choosing which 1,000 people in a country of 300 million would be given an increased chance of surviving a disease which was killing nearly 1 in 4 infected patients was probably the toughest decision of the war so far. Carliotti had informed the XCOM members it was a decision she would take advice on, but that had to be made by her and her alone, since history would demand to hold someone accountable for it, and it was better that accountability and the inevitable anger and blame that accompanied it be concentrated on a single person. Each member of XCOM drew up their own 1,000 list. 3 months into the war with the Shanghai Pact Nations, her XCOM was made up of her Chief of Staff H.R. Rosenstern, Vice President Mark Bentheim, Homeland Security Secretary Janet Belkin, Defense Secretary Dan Caulfield, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Earl Maxwell. Most were still sequestered on Greenland. Carliotti was working out of an isolation facility at Edwards Air Force Base so that she could show in her regular broadcast appearances that she was still in the country. She got 5 1,000 lists in advance of the meeting and had them compiled and analyzed to identify the common individuals across all lists. It didn't surprise her to see an overweight of politicians on the lists, from congressmen and women to senators and state governors. Supreme and federal court justices were also high on every list, as were military commanders for the 11 combatant commands and their general staffs. After that, the lists diverged wildly, informed by various political, ideological, and even religious beliefs. There were quite a few billionaire political donors on the lists,